Hey everyone, it's Tim from timgagnon.com, and I'm here posting my very first free full-length painting lesson on YouTube. I've split the lesson up into 3 parts. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go over and hit the subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, it will really help me out if you do, and you'll be notified as soon as the next parts come out, and you don't want to miss any of the parts to this painting lesson. So before we get started, I just want to mention a few things. I have a full set on basic landscape fundamentals in acrylic painting on my website. And I've got that on sale right now just for you guys for watching my free painting lesson. So if you have any trouble with acrylic paints at all, they dry really fast, you layer them more than blend them. If you want to learn all of those techniques, make sure you check out the link in the description below. Which is a direct link to the basic landscape fundamental set. Also, when you get done this painting lesson, you're going to want to frame it up. And if you head over to americanframe.com and check out their frames, I'm sure you'll find one that you like, and you can actually save 20% on your frame by using coupon code TGAGNON20. That's TGAGNON20, and you'll save 20% off your first frame purchase. So when you finish this masterpiece, you're going to want to frame it up. Okay, for my hills I'm going to be using that large brush again. I'm going to take a little bit of water. I'm going to take some blue. You can see it's going to be very ink-like. I'm going to take some raw umber. So we want this to be just a little bit more raw umber than our clouds were. I'm going to switch back to titanium white now because we want this to be a little more opaque. Okay, we want to evenly load the brush like this. Very thin paint. And the first thing I'm going to do is just test it to make sure it shows up, which it does. Okay, so this down here is just me scrubbing paint off from earlier. Don't worry about that. What I want to do is hold the brush vertical like this. I'm just going to create a hill shape. I'm actually going to go a little bit more blue because it's a little bit too brownish. Okay, so we can easily fix that. We're going to add in more blue, a little bit more white, right into that same color. I'm just going to test it over here. That's a little bit better color. So I'm going to mix this bluish color right in. You actually have to go a little bit more blue. If you put the color on here that's a little bit too brown, you actually have to go a little bit more blue than you would expect. Because the brown will show through. But for the hill shape, I'm just going to bring it to about here and just fill in. So the hill shape is just a really gradual slope. So just a little, you don't want to do these big triangles because that's really fake looking, I guess. You want to have kind of a natural look to it. So what I like to do is just layer over it a few times, trying to get a little bit more blue. I can leave little flecks of that kind of greenish here and there. But just doing those little vertical brush strokes, and you can see I've got some textures and everything there. It's not just all perfectly painted out. That will give the hill a little bit more character and look a little bit more real, and like it ties into the painting a little bit better. So you can take the bristles and point them up and just kind of place the brush on the top edge to give it a little bit of a softer edge. And I'll zoom in so you can see that. Okay, I'm going to push the hill up a little bit higher so you can see. So if you just press the brush and pull down, you get a few little pieces of your bristles sticking up outside the edge there. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit lighter. So I'm going to grab some of my titanium white, mix it right into the color I'm using. I'm going to do a few little brush strokes like this. This is going to create a little bit of atmosphere. So I'm starting at the bottom, then working my way up, and just being really sporadic with it. But it's going to create a little bit of atmosphere over the hill. So it'll help push it back. A lot of this is going to get covered up anyway by the next hill. Just some kind of vertical brush strokes. Work all the way up. So you've got a little bit of texture and a little bit of atmosphere. Okay, for my next hill, I'm going to stick with the same colors, but I'm going to add just the tiniest bit of sap green. So some raw umber, some white, some blue, and sap green. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just do a little bit of a larger hill, coming down and crisscrossing the hill we've got up here already. And this one, same thing, I'm pointing the bristles up to get that vertical shape. Got a little too much brown there on the brush, so I'll just grab some blue. So I want some variation in the hill, just like before. And I'll go all the way down to the bottom. You can see I just smushed the bristles up, and it creates that jagged edge. Okay, and I just want to get all of this filled in all the way down to the bottom. Brush strokes, you can see I'm kind of random. Down here at the very bottom, I'm not worried about getting a really thick layer of paint because eventually we'll have trees and everything there. So get that all filled in down bottom here. Okay, and I'm going to go back now with some blue and white. titanium white. And just like before, over on this one, just adding in some lighter kind of brush strokes, just to add in some variety in brush stroke and some atmosphere. Okay, eventually we'll add some more atmosphere to both hills, but for now this is pretty good. Got a good layer of paint on here. Just try to make the hill a little bit lighter down at the bottom. Like this, and slowly kind of just work it up. You don't want any bright white spots, but just a little bit lighter down at the bottom here. That will create a little bit of atmosphere for now, and we'll add more atmosphere with zinc white later. Okay, I'm at the point now where I want to go just pure zinc white. So we're just loading the tip of the brush, your round brush, and just going slow. Just pick out a few contours, still doing that rounded shape, and just let the paint run out. Just keep doing the contour shape, coming down and away until the paint runs out. You don't have to press hard on the brush at all. Okay, so we'll come up here, very lightly pressing. I don't want to cover up this shadow, so I just want to bring it close to that. You can overlap it a little bit, as long as you maintain it. Really light touch. Start curling around here on the bottom. Just pure zinc white, just the tip of the brush. You can also use pure zinc white and start adding in some of these little diagonal streaks. And I like to curl these as well. So curling down kind of adds to that billowing effect. So even down here, just curling a little bit, overlapping. Okay, so you can see that the highlights are really starting to pop now. And it's really important that I go inside the edge so I get that rounded shape to the front. Keep curling down underneath the cloud. Kind of help give that billowing look to the cloud. Working all the way across, don't want to leave out any spots here. Okay, we'll probably do another round of highlights, maybe even two, to what we already have up here. But I'm going to let that dry because I don't want to start scraping the paint off. In the meantime, I'm going to show you adding in some atmosphere over this first hill. Okay, so I'm going to take a pretty clean dry brush here. And I'm going to take just the smallest amount of zinc white, just little remnants like this. I'm actually going to wipe it off a little bit here on my palette paper. What I'm going to do is just start at the bottom and then just scrub up. So we're going along the bottom here, and scrubbing up. This technique is a little bit harder than it looks because a lot of times people put too much paint on and they don't move the brush fast enough because it dries really fast. Another thing is you can scrub right up over the hill. It's so transparent that it's not going to affect anything up above it. Just as long as you have the smallest amount of paint on there, scrub up and down and keep the brush moving pretty quickly. This is going to help create some atmosphere, and we'll probably do this. See, that's too much paint right there. So if you get that, you got to scrub pretty hard to get rid of it. We'll probably do this maybe 2 or 3 times, but the more you do it, the more atmosphere you get. So you just scrub right up and down. I scrub right over the top edge, but I'm trying to make it a little bit lighter at the base, so it looks like there's maybe some atmosphere at the base of the hill. Okay, I'm going to let that sit for a few minutes. I'm going to actually let the whole painting sit for about 5 or 10 minutes, let it cure up a little bit, see where the values go. As it dries, it gets a little bit darker. So we'll see where it stands in 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to our next step. Okay, I'm going to paint the foreground landing area, or just the piece of land that's way up front. What I'm going to do is take a little water, some raw umber, some of my brilliant blue, and some of my sap green, and we're just making a dark greenish color. Now this color, as long as it's kind of a dark greenish color, that's all that matters. It doesn't even have to match this because we're going to layer on top of this a few times. So we just really want a dark value color, and you can load your brush up pretty well here like that. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to prop my canvas up here so I can get all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to do a diagonal here. And I'm going to talk about the composition a little bit here in a second. But I'm just going to block in. This is where our poplar type trees are going to be standing. And I'm just going at a diagonal. I'm kind of doing that vertical brush stroke still that we did for the mountains or the hills. It doesn't have to be, it can be perfectly flat on top if you want. It doesn't have to be like grassy on top yet, because we're going to do that later. The main focus is to try to get this diagonal, a very slight diagonal down. So basically what we're doing is an opposing angle to the cloud angle. So this angle's going up with the clouds, this angle's going down. And what that does is it creates a good visual line for the viewer to look on. And I'll talk about that here just a second as we get this filled in all the way across. Okay, so just a slight diagonal up. So we've got, what we have here is a zigzag pattern with the hills and the land. It helps the viewer kind of travel their eye along the painting and look at the whole painting rather than just one spot. So having these diagonals like this, especially opposing diagonals, is really effective compositionally when a viewer looks at a painting. So that's why we've got all these diagonals in here. Okay, so you just want to have this nice layer of paint here filled in on this angle. And we'll let that dry. And while that's drying, I'm going to move back up to my clouds and do some more atmosphere on my hills as well. Okay, I'm going back to my round brush now, and I'm going into pure zinc white. Just zinc white by itself. And I'm going to hit mostly up top here, a couple highlights here and there, just brightening up the top portion of my clouds. So pure zinc white and just kind of sticking up to the top portion here, not really going down too low here. And again, try to get a little bit of variety in your contour shape. They can be a little bit repetitive, but a little bit of variety will help quite a bit. Just makes it that much more interesting if there's a little bit of variety in there. Okay, so that really brightens up the clouds, and you can see I'm just doing these small areas. Not really going too crazy with it. We'll go down here a little bit, just in a few spots. Okay, what I want to do now is add just a little bit of more shadow down here through the bottom. I'm going to take some water and I'm going to zoom in here to my palette so you can see. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do with this hill, take a little bit of zinc white. We don't want a lot on there. You can see the difference between that and putting on the highlights. It's just a very thin layer. And I just want to scrub over, mostly down in the valley area between the hills, and just get some more atmosphere. Okay, while I'm at it, I'm going to take a little bit of my zinc white, put a little streak up above the hill in the clouds. This will help the hill stand out a little bit more and create some more distance in the sky. Okay, and then a little bit more atmosphere down in the base. Okay, and I'm going to call that good. Okay, as long as this is dry here, I'm going to do the same thing now by adding in some atmosphere on this hill. So just really thin layers of zinc white starting down low, scrubbing up and down, leaving the top part of the hill a little bit darker. I'm going to work all the way across the hill. So I'm working right along this diagonal, this darker diagonal that we created, scrubbing in most of the thicker, it's not thick paint, but most of the paint down here at the bottom and scrubbing it up and around as fast as I can. So just working in these small sections, scrubbing a little paint on there and then moving it around. If you ever get too much paint, just scrub further side to side and up and down. But you got to go quick. If you're having trouble with this technique, it's also another one you can kind of skip if you have to. You can get away with not having as much atmosphere. If you get brave, you can add a little water if you ever get to a stuck spot. Side to side, up and down, and you really just move your brush around a lot until it starts to smooth out. This is a much harder technique, and you can see I scraped some paint off because of the water, but it does create some really nice atmosphere if you want to try that. So just a little bit of water mixed in. Okay, I'm going to call that good. I'm not really worried about this stuff getting scraped off here because I've got a line of trees that is going to go over it. So I'm not going to do much with that. I'm just going to leave it as is. I like the atmosphere I've got there. It's enough for me. If you wanted more, you can add more. But you really don't need a ton of that zinc white. You have to remember too that these hills are kind of a backdrop. And as you move forward, the focus moves forward too. So just remember, try to get it kind of loose and painterly and have some variation in your hill. The top part should be darker and the bottom part should have a little bit more haze to it. Okay, what I'm going to do now is let this dry and then I'm going to paint in the tree line going along here. Okay, for our next step we're going to switch to this smaller brush here. That's a small flat brush and it's got stiffer bristles that will splay out a little bit. And I use this for foliage. Okay, for my tree line, what we want to do is make a color that's a little bit more saturated than the hill, the second hill that's in the distance. So I'm going to take some sap green and some of my brilliant blue. And a little bit of raw umber to gray it down. Now when I load the brush, this color looks pretty good here. Okay, so when I load the brush, I'm going to just kind of get some of this extra paint off. What I want to do is push the brush down, so I'm holding the brush vertically, and I'm pushing the brush down into the paint like this, and that forces the bristles out, like that. So every time you reload the brush, you're tapping into the paint, creating this little splayed out shape. Okay, then what I'm going to do is hold the brush vertically. The bristles are going to be vertical rather than horizontal. And I'm going to tap my brush up and then down. I'm going to connect it right up to the foreground here. So I'm tapping up and I'm making just kind of these rounded shapes because this is just the background still. We're just moving up. It's actually the middle ground is what you'd want to call it. So just tapping up. Like I said, with that brush splayed out, you can make these little broken shapes that will look like treetops a little bit later. So you're just trying to make a tree shape. And this is a line of trees, so all these trees are connected up. There's little gaps in between them. But for the most part, they're kind of connected up. So you're making these kind of rounded shapes on top with a few little gaps here and there. And not all of them have to be the same height. Sometimes you can have maybe a line of trees here that's a little bit lower. You want to have some variety in your undulation there. But little gaps like that, little holes so you can see through to the background, really effective. Okay, so I'm going to carry these same shapes. I'm going to keep it all the same color. I'm going to carry these shapes, have them get a little bit lower over here. Then maybe we'll have one kind of pop up here, up above the mountain line. And that's another little compositional thing that you can do. When you have things crisscrossing and you take something in the foreground and cross over it, it creates a little bit of a visual interest point. It also pushes back the hills because it pops this forward if it crisscrosses the top edge. So those are little things you want to try to incorporate. Okay, so that's how you just create a basic tree line that's off in the distance. We'll add a little bit of a highlight to those a little bit later after we put in our foreground. So that's just kind of a basic thing. Remember, we're tapping we're tapping the brush down into the paint here vertically. So we're tapping down and that splays the bristles out. And we're holding it vertical. The bristles are vertical and we're tapping and that creates that broken brushstroke that looks like leaves. Okay, so it'll take a little practice. Look at the reference photo as you go, the finished image, to give yourself an idea of tree shapes. You can also go and look up poplar trees or type in tree line into Google and you can find different tree lines. It's really just a silhouette though of shapes going up and down with spaces in between. So if you simplify it that way, it's a little bit easier rather than trying to think, oh, I'm painting one little tree. Think of it as one uniform shape with spaces. So you've got these rounded shapes with spaces in between. And it'll be more effective. If you think about every little individual tree, it might either take you forever or you might get frustrated by trying to get it perfect. Remember, this is the middle ground, so there's a little bit of focus on it, but really the main focus is as we come out to the foreground. Okay, what I'm going to do now is just take a little bit of that sap green, a little bit darker, some blue and raw umber, just a little bit darker color. I just want to reestablish where the ground line is. You don't have to do this. I like to do this just to give myself an idea of where to put my trees in the foreground. This will get covered up later. So that's why I don't really care that it's kind of brownish. I just want it to be darker. So when I put my layers on later, I'll know exactly where the ground is. So just darkening up that line, that diagonal edge a little bit, just to give myself an idea of where I'm going. Okay, my foreground's drying right now, and in the meantime, all I want to do is just take my round brush back to that zinc white, just pure zinc white. Going up top again, and just highlighting these little contours. So just brightening it up a little bit more. Keeping my focus mostly up towards the top. With a few little pieces coming down. So just going around, highlighting a little bit while I'm waiting for the foreground to dry. You can see roll back every once in a while. Well, if you're not in a rolling chair, maybe just lean back or stand up and take a look. Don't fall over. I've done that in a lesson before. Not a good look, but usually I edit that out, so nobody really knows it happens. Just take your time. All we're doing is just kind of reinforcing these same contours over and over because the zinc white's really transparent and it takes a lot of layers to really illuminate the clouds. You could go faster with titanium white, but it would look less luminous and more flat. You'd have to go at the same kind of rate to avoid that, the same rate of layers. So it's just better to go with zinc white because it's a little bit easier. Okay, and I'll even come down here again. Add in a little bit of a brighter second layer. Okay, I'm going to call that good for right now. Now, foreground here is pretty much dry, so I'll move down to the foreground and start putting in our focal trees. All right, I'm going to start in with my focal trees, and I've switched now to a short flat brush. That's the number 8 in the set. And what I'm going to do is take a little of my raw umber, a little bit of my blue, just a little touch of titanium white. You really don't need much titanium white at all. I'm going to add just a little touch of water to thin it out, not much at all. I'm going to start with this nice dark gray to paint the tree trunks. Okay, so my first tree is not going to be all that tall. What I'm going to do is hold, you can see how narrow this brush is. The amount of pressure you apply as you go down will thicken the trunk of the tree. The thing is with these poplar type trees, we want the trunk to be pretty thin. So I'm not going to put much pressure on the brush. and I don't have all that much paint on the brush either. What I'm going to do is just draw a line down like this, very consistent width all the way down. Okay, and then I'm going to have a second tree very close to it. So I'm applying a little bit more pressure as I get lower, but not much. Okay, then I'm going to wash that brush off. Okay, and then with the same color, I'm switching to a liner brush now. And I'm just going to grab a little bit of the paint. You can add a little more water if you need to. And I'm just going to extend this up to the height that I want the tree to be. Just a really thin line. So I'll make this one a little bit taller, but a little bit shorter than the second tree. Okay, so this is going to be the height of my trees. Next, what I want to do with the liner brush is just pull off a couple little branches. And we're going to have these trees be pretty narrow, so you don't need a ton of branches coming off. And actually what I'm going to do is have there be two tree trunks really close together on this tree. So I'm going to do another really close one, almost touching. Then back to my liner. I'll do a few branches coming off this. This is just to help give the foliage a little bit of a base. Okay, then I'm going to switch back to that flat brush. I'm going to go into my sap green and a little bit of raw umber and blue. So a little bit darker. And we're going to tap into the paint just like before to display those bristles out. Okay, and I'm going to keep these trees thinner, but what I want to do is just kind of tap out from the tree trunk and leave lots of little gaps and spaces. So as we get up top here, we'll go a little bit more narrow at the top. Even if there's not branches right there, you can still add in some foliage. So we want these to come close to touching, but not quite touching. Okay, after I've got a little bit of foliage on there, I'm going to just take my time. What I like to do is twist the brush in my finger a little bit, my fingers, and just bring out some of these little pieces. Then I'm going to go back to my liner brush. We're going back into the gray that we made for the tree trunks. And I'm going to connect up some of this foliage so it's not just floating in space. Okay, so we'll bring little branches off, connecting things up. Just go really light with your touch. Do lots of little thin ones right up through the top there. Okay, then I'm going to take a little bit of titanium white with that gray, a little bit more raw umber. And I'm just going to fill in about an inch below where the foliage starts. So kind of this brownish gray. We'll fill that down to almost the ground. Then I'm going to grab some raw umber and blue, make a darker gray, have it go a little bit darker right underneath the foliage, and maybe a couple spots up through the tree. That same darker color we'll do at the bottom as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just let that sit for a minute, put in the rest of our trees going across to the right, and then we're going to start doing some detail to these trees to bring them out and give them a more substantial look. Okay, let's continue with our trees. So what we're going to do is take and make that same gray color. So some raw umber and a little bit of that brilliant blue and maybe just a tiny touch of titanium white, not really much. Go a little bit more raw umber and blue. And you can add just a little touch of water to it to thin it out, just a tad. We'll load the brush just kind of on the tip here. Okay, so we'll add another group of trees here. And remember, we're holding the brush vertical. We'll do 3 little thin trunks together. Then switching to that liner brush. Then adding just a few branches. And then we're going to go back to that foliage brush we've been using. I'm going to take some sap green, a little raw umber, a little bit of blue, making a nice dark green color. Tapping in to spread the bristles out. Then adding in some of our foliage. So tapping, kind of creating some unique shape. Maybe we'll curl this one up at the top a little bit. I'll put a little bit more right down here. Then going back to my liner brush into that gray. Just adding in some branches connecting up some of my foliage. Okay, and then we're adding a little bit of white to that gray, just like before, a little bit of raw umber. And the bottom portion of these trunks. Adding just a little color. Okay, so we're going to repeat that process again. As we move across here, we're going to go back into, we're going to make some more of that gray for the tree trunks. And we'll do a bunch here. Okay, and then go into the liner. We'll make these ones a little bit taller. Okay, and then once we have our guideline, we're going to go back to that flat brush, mix up some more of our green. So it's green, some brilliant blue, and raw umber. Smushing the brush in. And then we're just going to create some unique tree shapes here. Now these ones are all close together, so it's kind of okay to have them touching. So when you're trying to figure out shape for your tree, just look at the reference photo. They're kind of uniquely shaped trees, kind of my own creation from looking at poplar trees. They're not quite like poplars, or they're a little bit different because they're skinnier, not quite as round, but you could make them a little bit more rounded if you wanted to. Some of the important things is to make sure you have some gaps all the way through. And just that you have a nice pattern around the edges especially. Okay, so I'm going to go back now to my flat brush and my raw umber and blue. And we'll make another group. Trees right here. Okay, and I'm going to go to my liner brush. Now I want these ones to be the tallest because we want to have kind of this diagonal going down this way as well. So I'm just going to give myself a guideline. Those get painted over anyway, so if it's a little bit messy or sloppy, that's okay. I'll put in a few branches. I like putting more of the branches in after, like over here. Just taking my time and connecting up spots. Because really, I'm not sure exactly where all of the foliage is going to be yet, so I just like to give myself a guideline and then go from there. Okay, and then we'll go back to our foliage, which is the green, blue, and raw umber. That flat brush smushing in. The original painting was actually done on a 24 by 48 canvas, I believe, so we have a little bit less room on this one, so the trees are a little bit closer together, but it's the same idea. It was a little bit bigger canvas than this. Okay, and then finally what I'm going to do is just to throw off the repetitive kind of downward shape, I'm going to add in one more tree right at the end here that's a little bit shorter. Okay, so that's our initial layer for our trees. From here, what you can do is go through the trunks and add in some of that little bit lighter brown color. I'm going to darken up these trunks for right now. want to make sure these aren't so transparent. I had a little too much water, which made them kind of transparent. So I want to make sure that none of this stuff is transparent looking. Okay, and you can go to your lighter gray. Add in a little bit of color for now. Okay, for my next step, I'm going to go back to my flat brush here for the foliage, and we're going to start adding in some highlights to the foliage to these trees. Okay, for my very first layer of highlights, I want to go with some sap green, a little touch of blue, then a little touch of cad yellow medium. So we're looking for kind of a neutral mid-tone green to start with. Just a little bit of that blue in there to cool it down just a tad. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to smush the brush into the paint to spread those bristles out. And we'll start adding in some of that foliage. Okay, so this is a somewhat tedious process, but we're dipping into the paint, smushing into the paint, spreading the bristles out. And we're just going to go over kind of the top portion of the tree. And this is just a little bit lighter than what's already on there. So what we're going to do is leave this bottom part down here dark. Now I'm going to do highlight an entire tree here. I'm going to zoom in so you can see the brush strokes and everything. And then we'll skip ahead a little bit. I will show you highlighting all the trees, but it'll be a little bit quicker. So I'm going to really take my time, show you on this one. So you see this first layer here is really, really subtle. The next layer will be a little bit more bright. Okay, so my next layer, I'm just taking that same color and adding more cad yellow to the mix. Okay, so just a shift up in vibrancy and color. So just a little bit more yellow. Okay, so I'm zoomed in here on this tree now. And we're taking that color, it's a little bit brighter. And we're highlighting out towards our light source here, which is on the left-hand side. And what I would like to do is highlight in bunches. So I'm leaving little spaces in between, and on this right-hand side, I'm leaving that a little bit darker to make it look like it's in shadow. Okay, so a little gap here. And some highlights down here, but for the most part, we're going to leave this bottom right-hand side darker. Okay, so I'm just going to lift up my palette to show you the next mix. That same color, just a touch more yellow now. So we're slowly working it up. Still smushing right into the paint. Starting to highlight a little bit more. Just hitting fewer spots. And when you tap the brush, you're trying to maybe just use the corner to take up less area. So instead of pushing the whole brush on there, you're just pushing pieces of the brush on there. So you get little pieces of that pattern sticking out. And that starts to create that three-dimensional shape. It's similar to the clouds. We want a little bit of a highlight inside the edge. Okay, so then again, the next layer up will go right here. More yellow. Maybe a little touch of blue in there, so it's not too pure yellow. If you don't see much of a change, just go in, grab more yellow, until you start to see it show up a little bit brighter like this. Okay, then I'm going to go one more round lighter. So I'm going to go a little bit more yellow, and then I'm going to go a little touch of my titanium white. Not much white, just a little bit to bring the value up. Highlighting out towards my light source. Focusing on hitting little bunches of leaves rather than individual leaves. And as I work my way down, hitting fewer spots just because it's more in shadow. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit faster through this middle section here. Let's start over again. We're going to take that sap green, a little bit of blue, and then a little bit of yellow. I'm going to smush the brush into the paint and kind of create these little bunches of leaves, leaving little gaps in between to create some shadow. So as we get down lower in the tree, this is a group of trees, so trees, we're hitting fewer spots to make it look more in shadow. Always kind of twisting the brush a little bit in your fingers so that you're getting different shapes. But you're thinking more about mass rather than individual leaves. Little groups of leaves rather than just one at a time. So on this tree here, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to hit a little bunch of leaves like that, create a unique pattern, skip over a spot a little bit, leave a little gap in there for shadow, and add in some more. And your tree, you can go outside the boundaries a little bit, so that way you're reshaping your trees here and there. Okay, so then the next step is taking that same color and going a little bit more yellow. And taking that and starting to bring out the top left part of the tree especially out towards the light source. But as we get down further in the trees here, we're going to have less area painted so it looks more in shadow. All right, so then the next round is that same color, except more yellow, and then a little touch of white. So we're focusing on getting that top left-hand side out towards the light source the brightest. So you think shadow's being cast to the right here. Some of the tree is going to be in shadow, so. Okay, if your brush starts to get really dry, just dip it in water and wipe it off so the bristles don't start to dry out too much. I'm going to work over to this next tree here, and we're going to do it another time here, so try to get the hang of it. So sap green, a little bit of blue, and a little bit of yellow to start with. So we're getting a nice mid-tone green. Smushing the brush into the paint to spread the bristles out. And then what I try to do, kind of look for the holes in the tree. And then around those holes, look at a bunch. See, if this were to make kind of like two eyes and a nose and a mouth, look at those holes for a second. Around those holes, you have these bunches like this, like that, like that. So I look for those bunches around the holes and add in some shape. Make sure it's kind of speckled like that so you have some texture. Then I go to another one, but since this bunch is a little bit further away from the light source, I only tap on it a little bit. Then this bunch and this bunch, if you look at holes again, the bunches around the holes. This is way out towards the light source, so I'm going to pretty much cover the entire thing. Leave a little bit of shadow, a little bit of dark. So then over here, it's a little bit lower, but it's towards the light source, so I'm going to highlight it quite a bit, but then kind of fade it out as I get to the right-hand side. Then I've got more holes in the tree here, so that creates this bunch, kind of a triangular shape. This one, random spots on it because it's further away from the light source. Then as I get down here, just little touches. Okay, so that creates kind of a gradient of more saturation in color down to darker, less saturation of color. Okay, and I'll highlight this bunch. Okay, so that's how I determine where the bunches are. So the next step again would be go to this color, go lighter with the yellow. So second time through, I'll start with some of the bunches closest to the light source, so this top left-hand side. And I'm just tapping. I'm not covering the whole thing. You can see I've kind of got a random pattern there. Then I'll work my way down the tree. And as I get further away, less highlights on the bunches. Maybe little random highlights that kind of peek through. Okay, and you just keep going lighter with your yellow and eventually a little bit of white. And then that last time through, with the lightest color, you're really focused on just hitting a few spots. You know, I'm just using kind of like the corner of the brush or the top of the brush to make these random patterns. I'm not putting the whole brush down. It'll take some practice to get used to that, but the more of these paintings you do, and if you check out the Landscape Fundamentals course, you'll learn a lot about just how it takes some time to get the hang of some of these techniques, but once you have them, they become a lot easier. Okay, once I get a bunch of trees highlighted, what I like to do is go into that brightest yellow color, add a little bit more white and yellow for one final round of bright highlights. And I'll really hit just a few spots kind of up towards the top edge to illuminate the trees a little bit. Maybe a few spots on some of those bunches that I've created. Just little touches of color. Okay, so I've highlighted about 5 trees here for you. Now the challenge for you is to do the last 3 on your own. So I'm going to give you some time. Go ahead and work on those. When you come back to the next part, what we're going to do is fill in the trunks and some of the branches. Then I'm going to show you how to highlight the tree line in the back. So work on those last 3 trees, get those highlighted. And if you have questions and if you forget how to do it, just rewind this video back to the beginning of this, watch it again, and a couple times through it will click pretty well. So go ahead and do those and I'll catch up with you in a few minutes. Okay, so I hope you did all right with highlighting the trees. If you struggled a little bit, that's okay. It's actually a harder technique because you're using all parts of the bristles and the brush to create the pattern. And you have to twist the brush in your fingers, and you know, it's more about the gradient and texture rather than individual leaves. If you can get that nice brighter a top part of the tree that slowly fades to darker and you've got a little bit of shadows, that's all you need. And just remember to highlight the bunches around the spaces. That makes it a little bit easier, but again, it's still a technique that takes a little while to learn. So hopefully you check out some of the other lessons that have this technique and practice up a little bit. In the meantime, what we're going to do now is move on to adding in some more branches and tree trunks.